The spotlight effect in social psychology refers to the tendency that humans have to overestimate how much other people notice us and specifically notice our flaws. Essentially, when you experience the spotlight effect, you become super self-conscious and you assume that all the people in your periphery are hyperfixating on the little points of criticism that they could have with you. When the vast majority of the time, these people aren't actually paying you any attention at all. Yet we sort of project this criticism from ourselves upon them as if they're watching us and nitpicking everything wrong with us. Even if people are making these micro judgments about you in your day-to-day life, those judgments are themselves super inconsequential. The truth is, micro judgments don't last very long at all and are very quickly interrupted. 99% of the time, they have a complete lack of depth and are over almost instantly. They last for a fraction of a second, and more often than not, these criticisms are subconscious rather than conscious. I'm self-conscious as fuck. I have an example for you. I make music, and when I'm alone in my studio singing, there's no one there to perceive me at all. But I become hyper self-conscious because I imagine people listening to the music once it's released and judging me. In this situation, no one's judging me yet, but in my mind, I've created a bunch of critics. And I think this is a perfect example of the paranoia that we have when it comes to these micro judgments. So every person, almost on a daily basis, is making these kind of subconscious or conscious micro judgments about other people, whether that be in person, in public, at work, or across the internet. And for the most part, these micro judgments that we make are not themselves kind of done deliberately. They happen pretty involuntarily. I don't think many people set out to walk down the street and criticize the clothing of other people, but inevitably they do because it's simple stimulus and response. And it's important to note that these micro judgments aren't necessarily malicious or nefarious. Like, they don't always involve trying to put someone down. But when it comes to being perceived ourselves, generally, pursuant to the spotlight effect, we assume people are only focusing on the negative things about us. It's a very pessimistic outlook on what people assume of us. Either that, or we're hyper-conscious about being judged positively by other people. We want other people to notice the good things about us and have these internal dialogues that say, oh, his hair is very nice. Thanks. So because we have these kind of instinctive assessments that we conduct about other people around us, we are also aware that other people are doing the same to us, and we are the subject of these constant instinctive assessments. So we focus on what they're wearing, how they look, their hygiene, how they present themselves. We also focus on their behaviors, how they move, how they talk. And then so in turn, do we then make a point of being conscious of our own appearance and our own behavior? Now, there are many reasons that we do this, whether it be for survival instinct, checking for threats, or whether it be for the mental shortcuts that we rely on to navigate social situations efficiently. So they do have a sort of behavioral and psychological purpose that goes beyond just the social aspect that we ascribe to it. But I think they present quite an interesting ethical dilemma that's worth talking about. Given that we are sort of self-aware of our role as the judge and as the judged, how should we approach and handle judging and being judged? So here's my theory. I think that the most critical tool that we need to use when it comes to handling this ethical dilemma is compassion. So compassion is essentially kind of demonstrating a level of awareness to another being's suffering. And therefore we kind of give reprieve to other people's suffering by demonstrating to them that we see them and that they're visible. And I think it's quite intuitive to say that compassion is generally morally a good thing. I don't think many people out there could make the case that compassion is a bad thing. Compassion is a good thing. So when it comes to micro judgments, it's my position that compassion is rarely misplaced. And as moral agents, we're aware that we can kind of play both of these roles. We can both judge and be judged. So let's start with being judges. In certain situations, we might have these kind of involuntary or semi-voluntary judgments about other people based off what we perceive. So what I'm suggesting is using compassion as a response to any of these internal judgments that you make about other people. So for example, if you hear kind of like an internal criticism of someone's appearance, of their hygiene or their weight, you'll then put in sort of a response position. You now get to respond. So despite this person never hearing the judgment, the response that you have can be compassionate in the sense that you acknowledge the fact that you don't have all the information. So if a person, for example, is overweight, we have to acknowledge the fact that we don't know exactly why they're overweight. We can't just assume that it's because they're lazy and they don't care about themselves. It's obviously an incredibly complex issue that runs a lot deeper than just laziness and discipline. There are definitely certain extenuating factors for people that makes it harder for them to be in shape. Or if we judge someone to have poor hygiene, we don't know exactly why they have poor hygiene. So instead of responding to that judgment without compassion and kind of layering another judgment and saying that this person has bad hygiene because they don't care about themselves, and letting it rest there, you're kind of acting completely without compassion, which is super easy to do. But if you make a point of incorporating compassion into that response position, you can kind of prevent reinforcing an unhelpful judgment upon someone and remind yourself that people are complex and situations are complex, and have a policy that every person that you encounter deserves some sense of understanding when it comes to the judgments that you make about them. And I get that this might sound like super preachy and kind of cringe in a way, that you should be demonstrating compassion to everyone all the time. Like that's kind of an unrealistic expectation to have of people, to just be sort of permanently compassionate. And at the end of the day, like these micro judgments, as we're talking about, they're kind of internal. So they're completely inconsequential in that sense. Nobody is experiencing the micro judgments that you're making about them. So why do we insist on having a little school teacher in our head to police our thoughts? You have every freedom to not be compassionate to people. But the moral case for compassion when it comes to micro judgments is that in doing so, you can actually foster an internal sort of rational ecosystem that promotes kindness. And if that's your headspace, you only stand to benefit from that, because you can then exercise understanding to yourself when it comes to internal judgments. So I'm making the case that being compassionate when it comes to micro judgments is a good thing for yourself. So even if you don't give a shit about other people, which you are entitled to not, exercising compassion can actually be beneficial for yourself. I think if you observe another person who is systematically unpleasant to other people, you could only assume that this is kind of habituated behavior. And when they find themselves in the response position to a micro judgment internally, they probably hold the same kind of negative, unfriendly policy towards themselves as they do towards other people. So if my case doesn't appeal for you, that like we should be nice to other people to have a happy rainbow-filled sunshine world around us, then at least maybe you can see the benefits from being compassionate as to make your own life easier, because who doesn't want a nicer internal dialogue? Like if I'm having a shit day and then me to me is like, it's chill, my life is going to be easier. There's going to be less sort of internal malice and I'm going to be happier. And I think there's a meta point to be made here. When I have negative micro judgments about other people, I instantly feel guilt. I don't like the reactive thinking of judging someone based on something that they either can't control, or if they can, what benefit does my judgment have? I think you need to be compassionate with yourself in these situations and understand that your negative micro judgment is not born of you being a dick, and your internal dialogue isn't just an arsehole for the sake of it, that there's a multiplicity of reasons that you could be thinking like that. You might have an automatically negative response to a certain trait that someone has because of something that happened in your past and experience, or the way you were nurtured. Or it may be that it's just in your nature to be more threat aware than most other people. For example, I have OCD, which is accompanied with a lot of intrusive thoughts that can be really unpleasant. I don't judge myself for them. I just accept that this is out of my control. I can't hold myself morally accountable for things that I'm not choosing to do, things that are beyond my control. But I can control how I respond in these situations. So if I have a negative intrusive thought about a stranger, I can respond to that thought with compassion towards them. And if I feel guilty for having an intrusive thought, I have compassion towards myself. So by shifting your power and your judgment itself to the point of response, you actually reconfigure how you approach these situations to make it a more sort of positive thing. And, it might sound super simplistic and elementary and pedantic, but, positive is good. Life is easy when we feel good. We want to feel good. Being nice to people isn't maybe necessarily like super cool or sexy. And you might think, oh, it's a little cringe, spreading love. But yeah, I'm firmly of at least the rational perspective that being nice to people, if you're not doing it for the sake of altruism, you're at least doing it to make your own life better. And just by minimizing negativity, life becomes better. So I think one of the best insights you can realize when it comes to feeling judged is to acknowledge that no one really gives a shit. And I don't make that case to try and fabricate a mentality based off the falsehood that nobody is paying attention to you. People are paying attention to you. But if you kind of evaluate the significance of that attention, you'll realize that even if people do give the most marginal slither of a shit, it's so minimal. So even subjectively for them, in the context of their own life, that little snap of a second where they gave the littlest shit about something related to you is deeply, deeply insignificant. They judge you for a fleeting moment before being interrupted by another stimulus in their life, and they go on. When you are microjudged by people, one, you don't know for sure if it's happening, and two, it is for a fleeting second. And once the snap judgment is over, they return to being consumed by their entire existential experience. For example, you wear a unique hat on the bus and you notice a couple people staring at you or giving you odd looks. These might be completely valid indicators that you are being judged. But that person that's judging you on the bus doesn't go home and spend all this time thinking about how much of a fucking weirdo you are. And in the scenario where the person does go home and spend a bunch of time ruminating about their visceral hatred for you and your stupid hat, I don't think the person that was wearing the hat on the bus is the one with the most material and substance that we can criticize. It's the person who's ruminating over the person who wore the hat in the bus. And even if there are 20 people on the bus that are hyper focused on how stupid your hat is, chances are that's not even the most significant thing that's going to happen on that bus that day. I don't really like the idea that we have an ethical duty to do anything, because I think in a human context, in the sense that we derive duty from some pre-existing, ever-present moral law that's bigger than ourselves, I'm kind of the mind that there are no obligations in life, only consequences. I don't think anyone has a moral duty to do anything. I just think there are consequences for doing and not doing certain things. I wouldn't say that you have a moral duty to take care of yourself or promote your own well-being, but I would say there is moral benefits to that. So if you find yourself ruminating on the supposed microjudgments of other people, I think it's beneficial and compassionate to yourself to recognize that you focusing on other people's microjudgments is wasted energy. And even if they are judging you, have compassion towards them, because being judgmental, as you know from your own experiences, hopefully when you judge other people is not a pleasant experience. I don't think anyone truly enjoys criticizing other people for the sake of it. So instead of kind of allowing the substance of your own speculation to affect how you experience your life, you can train yourself to discard it. So over time, when you're wearing that silly hat on the bus, you're going to become less and less self-conscious. Your thoughts definitely don't have to be kind and understanding and compassionate. By choosing compassion in these response points to microjudgments and the response point to perceived microjudgments, you can detach from any unnecessary self-consciousness and detach from unnecessary criticism of other people. So yeah, microjudgments are inevitable. They're automatic. They're not your fault. They serve a purpose. And there is something you can do. By being compassionate, you are empowered, you affect positive change, and you can make life a whole lot easier.